Rachel Gurevitz, and welcome to A Dram and Drash. This is where the water of life meets the tree of life. The water of life, the definition of whiskey, derived from the Gaelic, and that which is part of Jewish tradition, the stories of our lives, our heritage, the tree of life, Eitz Chaim. This is where the two come together. Each month, I am going to be inviting to join me as a guest either a Jewish professional who happens to love whiskey, or a whiskey professional who happens to be Jewish. And we'll be sharing a dram, and we'll also be talking about that dram, and then sharing stories. And those stories will be of all kinds, but they'll touch upon who we are, our life experiences. They'll touch upon Jewish history and culture and food and ideas and creativity and beliefs. All of that wrapped up in a monthly podcast, and I hope you'll join us for the journey. So let's start with the dram. What am I drinking today? This is Bruichladdich Islay Barley. 2011 is this particular version here. 6 years in ex-bourbon oak barrels, as is common for whiskey, but this was finished in a mix of Sauterne, river salt, and an Austrian sweet wine barrel, which is going to give it some really distinct, beautiful notes. What's special about this Bruichladdich whiskey is that on the front, it tells you the names of the specific farms on Islay where the barley that was malted for this whiskey, where it was harvested. We're used to, in the wine world, hearing the word terroir. Wines have a terroir where the grape varietals are grown, the soil type, the elevation, the amount of sun, the angle of the sun. All of those things go into the qualities of the grape and the qualities of the wine. There's more of a debate about the role that terroir plays in whiskey. Terroir, in the broader sense, the idea that place makes a difference to what we taste. That is something that I think we can speak about in broad terms. For example, we'll find that a whiskey coming from somewhere like Scotland, with the climate that it has, the whiskey takes a number of years to mature, a number of years for all of those qualities to be pulled out of the barrels that the whiskey sits in. 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 years. Take a whiskey that comes from Israel or from India, and the intensities of the heat and the evaporation process taking place means that a whiskey can reach a different kind of maturation in 3 years. So place, the broader sense of terroir, clearly makes a difference. But whether the barley of a specific field makes a difference once the distillation process has taken place, it's an interesting debate. I have to say that this particular series, the Islay Barley series, when you line up the different years, they all have different qualities to them, and it's just a fascinating experiment. The Bruichladdich distillery is on Islay. Now, Islay is usually associated with peaty whiskies, and indeed, the Bruichladdich distillery does make beautiful peated whiskies. They are the Port Charlotte range of their whiskies. They also have an extra intensely peated whiskey, the most heavily peated whiskies in the world. That's the Octomore range. But the Islay Barley, this is an unpeated whiskey. For a good many years, the Bruichladdich master distiller was Jim McEwen. That's a name that you're going to hear associated with lots of places. He is an absolute legend in whiskey making. From a child in his teens, he worked initially at Bowmore on Islay and was with Bowmore for many years, and then moved over to Bruichladdich, and in more recent years helped to get a brand new distillery off the ground that is still in the process of aging its first whiskies, Ardnahoe. I got to visit that when I was on Islay this summer. Well, that's a little bit about the history of this whiskey. I'd like to just give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about what it tastes like, what it looks like. You can see as I hold it up, it's got a beautiful sunshine color, absolutely golden. And that's what it's brought from the barrels. When you take your first nosing of this whiskey, it has notes of coconut that come through, lemons, and other fruits as well. I would describe it almost like a compote. It's got a sweetness to it, but a lot of fresh fruit notes. When I take my first taste, I get orange peel and some of those other fruit notes coming through. I also get a honey flavor coming through, a light, flowery honey. And the finish is an incredibly long finish. There's a little bit of sort of milk chocolate and nuts in that mix. This is actually bottled at 50%, 100 proof. And you could add some water to further open it up. But it is such a smooth and well balanced whiskey that you can drink it at this proof, and there's really very little burn. But that finish, it's still there. It's an incredibly long lasting, beautifully balanced whiskey, as so many of the Bruichladdich range are. So that's my dram. Now, what about my drash? Well, I thought I would just share a brief word about why I'm doing this. So, I have been an appreciator of whiskey for a very long time. It's a little bit part of a family heritage. My father is from Scotland, and so his side of the family, they were all in Glasgow. For a while, my uncle of blessed memory worked for one of the whiskey companies, Teachers, one of the blended whiskies. And so we grew up with whiskey being present. It was there for the kiddish. It was there when the family gathered at festivals or other kinds of meals, where often the gathering would begin with, "Would you like a wee dram?" My grandmother of blessed memory, who lived till she was 102, was not much of a drinker, but she would say yes to that wee dram on Shabbat and special occasions. And she lived to 102, so I find that quite inspiring. So I've always had an appreciation for whiskey. And in the last 10 years, that intensified. I got very lucky because of the place where I ended up becoming the congregational rabbi at B'nai Shalom in Westborough, Massachusetts. Here in this town, we have a particular liquor store where the owner has a distinguished reputation in the whiskey world, to the level of Keeper of the Quick, which is a special award given to people who have made a contribution, a significant contribution to the whiskey world and whiskey industry. And Julio's Liquors is the place for the Loch and Key Society. And because it's been there on my doorstep, I've had opportunities to attend tastings and educational seminars and festivals that's really helped teach me how to taste. And I've learned an awful lot more about the world of whiskey. I recently had a sabbatical, and during that time, I decided to take the opportunity to explore this hobby a little bit more. I took a certificate in Scotch whisky from the Edinburgh Whisky Academy, in which I learned a great deal about the process of making whiskey and all of the elements that go into the final product. I also spent time learning about the history of bourbon. And what I did not know when I began that exploration was the role that Jews played in that history, particularly in the late 1800s and early 1900s. That's a fascinating story for another day, but it opened my eyes to the possibility of whiskey being a doorway into all kinds of stories. And so that's the purpose of this podcast, to share those stories with you, to introduce you to people who have stories to tell, to come together over a dram, and to explore all kinds of themes, ideas, history, culture, food, beliefs, all of this as we share a Dram together. So I look forward to you joining me on this journey. The first episode will launch in September. And you can follow along so that you don't miss an episode or to catch up on episodes in all of the places you would expect to look. A Dram and a Drash has a Facebook page. It has an Instagram page. It has a Twitter page. And you can also find it on my own website, rabbirg.com/Dram and Drash. I hope you'll join me for the journey. L'chaim.